These are the 5 worst ways you can spend your money in your 20s if you want to achieve financial freedom. So I'm 28 years old, and in the past 8 years, I've made some good financial decisions, but I've also made some absolutely horrible ones. And today I want to share with you what I now think are the worst ways to spend your money at this stage in life and give you some better alternatives for each one. These should help you to avoid these mistakes and achieve financial freedom much more quickly. I also think a couple of these might be quite controversial, in particular 3 and 4, so let's get into it and we'll see what you think. My first point is cars. And to be honest, this is a really difficult one for me because I absolutely love cars. But you've got to maintain your discipline here because cars can sink your cash like almost nothing else. And don't get me wrong, I'd absolutely love a new Porsche, but ultimately it's not going to help me to achieve financial freedom, and you've got to remind yourself of this every time you're tempted to spend your money on an expensive car. At this stage in life, it's super important to be utilizing the money you've earned to help you make more money. If you have a limited supply of funds, as most people do at this stage, you have to be really strict to make sure you're using that effectively. If you're going to buy a car, definitely don't buy it on finance, and don't buy anything that you can't afford really easily. You've got to make sure it's something really reliable and at least 5 years old, as most of the depreciation happens in the first 4 years. If you get a reliable vehicle from a good manufacturer with low mileage, you'll avoid lots of maintenance fees and unnecessary costs. And just so you know, I'm not making this up, my car is like 10 years old and has like 45,000 miles on it. Insurance is really cheap, and to be honest, it's perfect for what I need right now. If you can maintain your discipline at this stage and not get wrapped up in the need to show off to others, you'll avoid that massive monthly charge for a depreciating asset. And rather than spending that money now, invest it to earn more money. Then if you want to buy that car later in life, do it off the interest or the earnings you've made from that investment, which I know is something that Grant Cardone always talks about, and clearly he's doing something right. My second major money sink to avoid is overspending on rent. Again, for this one, I'm going to talk from personal experience. I was really frugal with housing from 20 to 27 and lived in large house shares for most of that time. I actually also moved back to my parents' house for a year to save up for a mortgage when I was 25. Doing this actually let me buy a 2-bed apartment in London at 27 with no other financial support, which is obviously one of the most expensive housing markets in the world and just wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And look, I know rent is pretty unavoidable for most people, so my point here isn't to not pay any, because I know that's just not realistic. But all you need to do here is not overspend on rent just for the sake of living a life of luxury too early on in life. It's super tempting as you begin to enter your mid-20s to massively increase your housing spend, because at this point you've normally had a couple of pay increases, you're bored of living in your basic apartment, and frankly, you can afford it. The problem with this is that very quickly you end up with a massive monthly expenditure that you're literally just throwing away. You need to keep the percentage of the money that you're spending on rent each month, or any kind of housing for that matter, as low as possible for as long as possible. Some people in London actually spend as much as 50% of their monthly income on rent, which is insane. If you're already living away from your parents, try to have housemates as long as possible, as that will reduce both your rent and your utility bills. Whenever you think about upgrading a home, try to see if you can delay it for at least a year. If you do this every time you think about upgrading, you'll save a lot in the long run, as honestly a year goes by extremely quickly. Equally, as I mentioned before, if you have the opportunity to, try to live with your parents for as long as possible. I know it probably won't be as fun as living with your friends, but if you can do it for a couple of years and save well, it will push you ahead years financially. It also helps you to focus on your goals, as housemates can honestly be a huge distraction, and saving up and focusing for just a year or two can push you 3, 4 or 5 years ahead financially, so it's definitely worth doing. Alright, moving on to my third point, and this is where I think it's going to get a little bit more controversial, but in my opinion, if you want to achieve financial freedom in your 20s, there is absolutely no point investing a large portion of your income into ETFs or index funds. Okay, hear me out. I'm not suggesting that investing is a bad idea, and I think it's obviously important to make sure you always have a safety net. Lots of people suggest having 3 to 6 months of expenses available, and if you want to put that in something like a really safe index fund, then go for it. What I'm talking about here is people that invest a massive percentage of their income into an ETF with the hopes of it slowly increasing in value over the next 5, 10 or 15 years. Think about it. If your goal is to create a lot of wealth at an early stage in your life, investing to slowly increase an amount of money over the next 30 years makes literally no sense. By the time that works, and don't get me wrong, it probably will work, you'll have hopefully already achieved your goals and not be dependent on that money. So all it's actually doing is making it harder for you to achieve your goals in the short term because you've locked that money away and can't touch it. This obviously only works if you actively use that money to increase your earning in the short term. This could be your own business or side hustle to help you earn more money now, or it could simply be investing and learning. I know Alex Hormozi has a phrase about the S&P 500, and I think to be honest, he's completely right. You should invest in skills because these are things that are going to compound in returns much more quickly than something like an ETF. And let's be real, if you don't think you're able to generate more than a 6 to 8% return, which is what most people hope for from an ETF, by investing all of your disposable income in yourself and learning, then I'm afraid you're simply not going to achieve financial freedom anytime soon. As I've mentioned before in a previous video, learning certain key skills will help you regardless of your field. If you understand core business and sales skills alongside a couple of specialist skills like social media marketing and coding, it will pay you much more in the short term than the S&P 500. So invest in what will give you a return right now, and that's yourself. Moving on, and I think this is honestly going to be another controversial one, but do not spend your money on a luxury watch. It seems like every person on YouTube is telling you that watches are a great investment and a great way of investing your money in your 20s. And as someone that's previously owned a Rolex in his 20s, I can tell you it's not. Again, for me this one's really hard because I actually love watches, and if I had an unlimited supply of resources, I would have a huge collection. However, the thing that people that tell you watches are a great investment don't actually tell you is firstly, they don't always go up. Have a look at this graph and you can see that one of the most popular watches in the world has nosedived in resale value just as the stock market also crashed. That actually means it's no more secure than putting your money into stocks in reality. What they also don't tell you is that watch insurance is really expensive. I'm talking like $400 a year expensive. You also have to get an official maintenance every 5 years, which is about $500. And most importantly, calling a watch an investment for most people is frankly just not true because you're not going to sell it. You're going to buy this thing because you love it and therefore you're going to keep it. You're not going to want to sell it for anything, and that means you're essentially locking that money away forever, and just like an ETF, that's now money that you can't utilize to grow your worth anymore, beyond the slow appreciation of the asset itself, and again, you're not going to sell it, so who cares? The other point here is that a watch doesn't actually do anything for you beyond supporting your ego. Instead, if you can buy something like a fitness tracker or a smartwatch, which will help to monitor your sleep and health, it can actually help in turn to improve your productivity. This means you can get more work done and ultimately make more money, and won't have yet another thing to worry about on a daily basis. And my final problem with watches that's worth mentioning, even though it's nothing to do with money, is that they attract all of the worst kinds of attention. I think there's this myth that exists, particularly among young men, that they'll buy a luxury watch and somehow suddenly be more attractive to other people. And let me tell you from experience, that's just not the case at all. The truth is, the vast majority of the public couldn't tell you a Rolex from a Timex, so you're only going to attract one of two kinds of attention. The first is harmless but pointless, and that's just other watch enthusiasts. Don't get me wrong, it can be fun to chat about watches for 10 minutes with a stranger, but it's not going to do anything for you beyond that. And the second kind of attention is from, much more concerningly, thieves. Simply put, the only people who cares about these things are people who want them, either legitimately or not. In my opinion, it's just not worth having something that increases your chances of being robbed or otherwise targeted, which is why I no longer have one, nor intend on getting one anytime soon, and I suggest you don't either. Okay, now we're out of the most controversial points, let's move on to number 5. My final point is games consoles. Like most people, I really enjoy playing video games. I played loads growing up as a kid. The problem is, if you're anything like me, they don't ultimately fulfill you beyond being fun at the time. You don't feel better about yourself after playing games for 2 days straight, and you're no closer to your goals. And from a financial perspective, consoles are a huge compounding problem. The first problem, and probably the most obvious one, is that they're expensive. The console is expensive, the games are expensive, controllers, online subscriptions, and DLC are all expensive. They're designed to make money. And don't get me wrong, compared to other things in this list, the cost itself probably isn't the biggest issue. You're going to spend more money on any car than consoles, and you're definitely going to spend more money on rent. So for consoles, this isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that they encourage you to play video games regularly. They're literally designed to get you addicted to them, because the more you play, the more likely you are to spend more money. That means that if you buy one, you'll now have something in your home at all times that is literally encouraging you to be less productive and not work towards your goals. I've talked about making healthy habits before on this channel, and one of the core rules of forming habits, as defined by Atomic Habits by James Clear, is to make it easy. To me, the simplest way to ensure I don't waste all my time on games is to simply not have a console around me. Just the one simple commitment to not having it means you're never going to play it, which means you'll have hours a week to focus on your goals and ultimately to make more money. And if you commit to this now, you're more likely to be able to do whatever you want with your time in the future after you've achieved your goal of financial freedom. So those are my points on the worst things you can spend money on. Hopefully you found this video useful and it made you think a little bit more about how you're allocating your money. If you want to learn more about how I've gone from broke to not ever worrying about money over the course of my 20s, you can watch this video here. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.